The year was 2024, and Marcus Whitfield, CEO of Mineral Corp International, was about to walk into what he thought would be another routine meeting with an African president. He had done this dance 100 times before: fly into some impoverished capital, sit across from desperate leaders, and dictate terms that would make his shareholders billions while leaving entire nations with nothing but poisoned earth and empty promises. But on this December morning in the Republic of Adansi, something was different. The 32-year-old president waiting for him had spent 2 years preparing for this exact moment, and what happened next would send shockwaves through every corporate boardroom from London to New York. This is the story of how one confrontation ended 50 years of legalized theft and changed the fate of an entire continent forever. Marcus Whitfield stepped out of his private jet onto the tarmac of Adansi International Airport, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. At 58, he had built his career on what he called African opportunities, a euphemism for extracting maximum wealth while paying minimum compensation. His company, Mineral Corp International, operated across 17 African countries, and their formula was simple: identify corrupt officials, offer them personal enrichment in exchange for national resources, and laugh all the way to Swiss banks while entire populations remain trapped in poverty. The presidential palace looked impressive from the outside, but Whitfield had learned long ago that impressive facades in Africa usually meant desperate leaders inside. He had brought his usual delegation: two lawyers, a briefcase full of contracts that heavily favored Mineral Corp, and the quiet arrogance that came from 3 decades of getting his way. What he didn't know was that President Kwame Asante had been waiting for this moment for exactly 743 days, ever since he had held the hand of 8-year-old Marie Osei as she died from kidney failure, caused by mercury poisoning from Mineral Corp's illegal gold processing operations. As Whitfield entered the palace conference room, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Instead of the usual setup with just the president and perhaps a minister or two, the room was packed. Ministers, military officials, international journalists, and cameras everywhere. But what made his blood run cold were the massive screens lining the walls and the dozens of boxes labeled evidence stacked around the room like an accusation waiting to explode. President Asante stood at the head of the room, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 50 years of accumulated rage. Mr. Whitfield, welcome to Adansi. You're probably wondering why there are so many cameras here today. It's simple. The world needs to witness what we're about to show them. You see, for the past 2 years, my team has been conducting the most comprehensive investigation into corporate crime in African history. We've hacked your servers, interviewed your victims, tracked your money, and documented your murders. Yes, Mr. Whitfield, I said murders, because that's what you call it when you knowingly poison children for profit. The first screen lit up with satellite images showing Mineral Corp's operations across Adansi: massive mining complexes that had never been declared to the government, illegal processing facilities hidden in remote areas, and environmental destruction visible from space. Whitfield tried to maintain his composure, but his lawyers were already whispering frantically. This wasn't the usual African bluster they were used to dismissing. This was evidence, real evidence, and it was being broadcast live to news outlets across the continent. Let me show you what 50 years of Mineral Corp looks like in human terms, Asante continued, clicking to the next slide. The screen filled with the photograph of Marie Osei, the 8-year-old girl whose death had triggered this entire investigation. This is Marie. She loved mathematics and wanted to be an engineer. She died last year because your company decided it was cheaper to dump mercury into our water supply than to properly process your gold. We have the internal memo where your environmental manager calculated that paying for a few funerals would cost less than installing proper filtration systems. The room fell silent except for the clicking of cameras and the scratching of pens as journalists documented every word. Whitfield finally found his voice, but it came out smaller than he intended. Now see here, we follow all local regulations. If there were problems, they should have been reported through proper channels. His standard deflection sounded pathetic even to himself in the face of the evidence surrounding him. Asante's laugh was bitter and sharp. Local regulations? You mean the regulations you wrote through the officials you bribed? Let me show you those proper channels you're talking about. The screen changed to show bank records, payment schedules, and recorded conversations. This is Minister Kofi Mensah, our former mining minister. Over 12 years, Mineral Corp paid him exactly $2.3 million in bribes. In exchange, he gave you concessions worth $847 million. But here's the beautiful part. We have recordings of your executives laughing about how cheaply you bought him. One of your vice presidents actually said, and I quote, "These Africans will sell their grandmothers for a new Mercedes." The evidence kept coming in waves that crashed over Whitfield's composure like a tsunami. Internal Mineral Corp documents showed they had known their operations were killing people, but had calculated it was more profitable to pay occasional compensation than implement safety measures. They had an actual spreadsheet titled Adansi Death Projections that estimated how many people would die each year from their operations and budgeted minimal compensation accordingly. The mathematical precision of their evil was breathtaking. You want to know the real genius of your system? Asante's voice was rising now, fueled by righteous anger that had been building for years. You didn't just steal from us. You made us thank you for it. You paid our corrupt officials pennies while extracting millions. You built one school while poisoning 10 villages. You donated to charities with money you stole from the very people those charities were supposed to help. You turned us into beggars in our own land, grateful for crumbs from our own table. The ministers around the room were no longer hiding their anger. Many had seen their own communities destroyed by Mineral Corp's operations. They had watched relatives die from preventable diseases, while the company extracted enough wealth from their districts to fund entire healthcare systems. They had been forced to stay silent by a system that protected foreign corporations over African lives. But now their president was speaking truths they had been forbidden to voice for decades. The financial evidence was perhaps the most damning. In Adansi alone, Mineral Corp had extracted minerals worth $847 million over 2 decades. They had declared profits of less than $89 million to local authorities. The rest had vanished through transfer pricing, shell companies, and creative accounting that would make actual criminals blush. $847 million, Asante repeated, letting the number hang in the air. Do you know what we could have built with that money? Every single person in Adansi could have had free healthcare, free education, clean water, and modern infrastructure. We could have eliminated poverty entirely. Instead, that money bought yachts for your executives and politicians in your pocket. But the revelation that shocked even the hardened ministers came when Asante displayed Mineral Corp's intelligence files. The company had maintained detailed profiles on every African leader, their weaknesses, their vices, their price tags. They had an entire department dedicated to compromising officials through everything from bribes to blackmail. "This is my favorite document," Asani said with bitter sarcasm. "It's your company's African Strategy 2020. Let me read you some highlights. Target younger officials before they develop principles. Exploit tribal divisions to prevent unified resistance. Maintain poverty to ensure desperation and compliance. Never allow local processing of raw materials." These are your actual words, Mr. Whitfield. This is your business model. Systematic impoverishment disguised as investment. The medical evidence was the final straw. Areas around Mineral Corp mines showed cancer rates 500% above normal, birth defects that doctors had never seen before, and water tables poisoned for generations. The company had conducted their own health studies and knew exactly what they were doing to local populations. They just calculated that African lives were worth less than safety measures. "You have a formula," Asante said, his voice shaking with controlled rage. "A mathematical formula for how many African deaths are acceptable for each $1 million in profit. You literally put a price on our lives, and that price was always too cheap." Whitfield's face had gone from confident pink to ash gray as the evidence mounted. His lawyers were shuffling papers desperately, but they all knew this wasn't a legal proceeding they could influence with technicalities and jurisdictional challenges. This was a reckoning, and it was being broadcast live to the world. Asante stood up and walked directly to Whitfield, pulling out an official document and slamming it on the table. "This is your eviction notice. Every Mineral Corp operation in Adansi is now property of the people. Every mine, every truck, every piece of equipment your company claimed to own was stolen money. Your bank accounts in our jurisdiction are frozen. Your assets are seized. Your executives have exactly 24 hours to leave our country or face arrest for crimes against humanity. Finally, Whitfield found his corporate voice, the one that had bullied governments for decades. This is illegal. You can't just, we have contracts. International law will protect us. You'll be sued into oblivion. But even as he spoke, the words sounded hollow. The old playbook was being torn up in real time. Asante's laugh was without humor. Sue us? With what authority? The same courts that let you murder our children for 50 years. The same international law that protected your theft while our people died? No, Mr. Whitfield. We recognize no authority that places corporate profits over African lives. Your contracts were signed with traitors and paid for with blood. They are worthless. As security moved forward to escort Whitfield out, Asante delivered his final blow. Before you run back to Switzerland, know this. We've sent everything to every African country where Mineral Corp operates. Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Congo, Zambia, Tanzania. They all have the evidence now. They're all taking action. Your company isn't just finished in Adansi. It's finished in Africa. Everywhere. The transformation was immediate and continental. Within hours of the confrontation going public, Mineral Corp's stock price began its death spiral. Emergency meetings were called in corporate headquarters around the world, but it was too late. The evidence Asante had released was being analyzed by governments across Africa, and they were all reaching the same conclusion. They had been systematically robbed. Ghana announced emergency sessions to review all Mineral Corp contracts. Nigeria froze assets pending investigation. South Africa launched a judicial commission with subpoena powers. The Democratic Republic of Congo declared all company concessions suspended. It was a continental uprising that no amount of corporate lawyers could stop. But Asante's masterstroke was revealed in the months that followed. He had assembled a team of international lawyers, not from Western firms that serve corporate interests, but from countries that had successfully fought corporate exploitation. Brazilian lawyers who had taken on oil companies, Indian advocates who had defeated pesticide manufacturers, Chinese legal experts who understood resource nationalism. They were ready for the legal war that Mineral Corp would wage. More importantly, Asante had built alternatives before striking. He had secretly negotiated with state-owned enterprises from various countries who were willing to buy African minerals at fair prices, transfer technology, and train local workers. The monopoly that companies like Mineral Corp had used to dictate terms was already broken. They just didn't know it yet. 6 months later, the transformation was undeniable. Mining revenue to the Adansi government had increased by 800% as fair market prices replaced the rigged system. Employment in the mining sector had quadrupled as local processing created thousands of jobs. Environmental restoration, funded by seized Mineral Corp assets, was healing decades of damage. Health facilities built with recovered money were finally addressing the medical crisis in mining areas that had been ignored for generations. The model spread like wildfire across Africa. Tanzania nationalized idle concessions held by speculators. Zambia demanded local processing of copper ore. Ghana increased mining royalties by 500%. The Democratic Republic of Congo canceled exploitative deals and retendered them at fair market prices. The race to the bottom, where countries had competed to offer the lowest taxes and weakest environmental protections, was over. Marcus Whitfield's personal fall was complete. The man who had once dictated terms to presidents was now unemployable, his name forever associated with corporate crimes against humanity. In his final interview, months after his humiliation, he still tried to justify his actions, claiming Mineral Corp had brought development to Africa. But the images of poisoned children and devastated landscapes made his words sound hollow even to himself. The day that Kwame Asante looked Marcus Whitfield in the eye and said, "Get out of my country and never come back," became known across Africa as Economic Independence Day. It marked the moment when the continent stopped accepting theft disguised as investment, poverty marketed as partnership, and exploitation packaged as development. The footage of Whitfield stumbling out of the presidential palace played repeatedly on African television, a reminder that the mighty could fall, that exploitation could end, and that leaders could choose their people over corporate profits. Years later, economists would calculate that the Mineral Corp model had cost Africa over $12 billion in stolen wealth, enough to eliminate poverty across multiple nations, enough to build world-class infrastructure, enough to educate every child and treat every disease. But that money had instead built the wealth of shareholders who lectured Africa about corruption while profiting from the systematic theft of an entire continent's resources. The revolution that began in that presidential palace continues today. African leaders who serve foreign corporate interests over their own people are being exposed and removed. The continent that was looted for centuries has finally found its voice, and that voice is saying clearly, Africa's resources will serve Africa's people. The age of corporate colonialism is over. The thieves have been told to get out, and there's no turning back. What happened in that palace in Adansi wasn't just about one company or one country. It was about power, who wields it, who fears it, and who has the courage to reclaim it. Today, as you benefit from African resources in your phone, your car, your jewelry, ask yourself, are you part of a fair exchange, or are you holding the profits of theft? Because somewhere in Africa right now, another young leader is gathering evidence, preparing for their own moment of truth, ready to look exploitation in the eye and say those two words that changed everything: get out. The question isn't whether more confrontations like this will happen. The question is, when they do, which side of history will you be on?